Hi, everybody. As promised last week, we're going to have a mindfulness Q&A with Dr. Dean Howells this week. So first of all, thank you to all those students who have sent us questions for Dean. It's going to be quite quick fire. We've probably got around 15 minutes, so we're going to go through the questions quite quickly. But for those people who want to explore a little bit further, we've got a playlist of mindfulness, of guided mindfulness sessions below this feed, and also to remind people that we also have the Mindful Library available on Moodle for both students and staff. So please check that out if you can. So I'll bring in Dr. Dean Howells now and say hello to Dean. Hi, Dean.
Hi, everybody. How are we today?
We're doing well, thank you, Dean. We either get really hot weather or we get thunderstorms, but I think we're surviving.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a bit muggy, isn't it, at the moment? But
it certainly is.
Yeah, and thanks to those who have sent questions in. And if anybody does have any questions, as if they're watching live, then please feel free to pop those in the comments too, and we'll pick them up at the end and see if we've got anything extra to what we've already been sent in.
That's great, thank you, Dean. And without further ado, I'll probably go straight into the questions. And I think important to reiterate, we obviously have all the resources and links below for further research into mindfulness, because we'll be fairly quick today. And I think we've got 7 questions. So I've got them scribbled down here. So if I fire them at you, first one
I'll do my best.
Which is probably quite a common question, I imagine, with regard to mindfulness and some misinterpretations around it. And that was, how can I use mindfulness if I'm not a Buddhist?
Yeah, great. Let's deal with the hardest one first. the elephant in the room. Yeah, a lot of the work. I've been practicing mindfulness myself for over 20 years, but really in the past 10 years, as it's grown in popularity, that's been both a blessing, but also there's been a lot of misconceptions about mindfulness with a capital M. And so, the concept of mindfulness, when we trace back its history, we actually go back before Buddhism. So the practices of mindfulness in Buddhism, we can trace back to Hinduism before that. So there's a bit of debate going on there. But Buddhism was the first to use the word mindfulness to describe the process, and then to wrap meditative practices around it that bring the state of mindfulness. Of course, in the mindfulness that we've been doing together, often it's called modern mindfulness, and as opposed to traditional mindfulness or spiritual mindfulness. But really, the modern mindfulness that we do doesn't deny its links to Buddhism. John Kabat-Zinn, when he created the first modern mindfulness program, he brought the word from Buddhism. He brought a couple of meditations. He brought some of the attitudes about non-judgment and acceptance and compassion. Those things aren't unique necessarily to Buddhism. In fact, John Kabat-Zinn himself says that mindfulness is as much Buddhist as gravity is English. So the idea that just because gravity was first written and described in detail by an English scientist doesn't mean that it's not universal. And so the same thing's true with mindfulness. The state of mindfulness is a universal state we can all experience. In Buddhism, they have particular practices, philosophies, belief systems that wrap around that. In the mindfulness that we do, if you want to explore that, great. If you don't, then there's other versions and approaches and things you can do with mindfulness where you don't necessarily have to go into Buddhism, or you can pair it with your own faith if you've already got one. So much more open access modern mindfulness is, but it doesn't deny the links to Buddhist mindfulness.
Fabulous. I've learned so much there, and that's question 1.
Yeah, it's a good
one. So if I move on to another question from one of our students, and quite a simple question, it's something I often think, and that's, do I need a strict routine of mindfulness practice?
Yeah, follows on nicely from the previous question, doesn't it? Because of course, mindfulness as part of Buddhism, mindfulness is a small component in a much wider belief and lifestyle system, which does require a very dedicated, quite strict regime, routine. It's a discipline in that sense. So in mindfulness, as it's with a capital M today, we've still got that element for those that want to go down that pathway. So I sometimes work with clients or students, and they quite like being strict and disciplined and writing it down in their diary. And I'm going to do 20 minutes daily at this time of day. And for some people that works really well. But again, because the modern version of mindfulness has so many different flavors and approaches, there's no sort of rule that you have to do it that way. I've worked with people who are a lot more organic, a lot more fluid, and sort of, they're grabbing moments where they can, or they're pairing their mindfulness with things that they're already doing. These are what we call in the moment techniques. So maybe I play sport, I can bring my mindfulness there. Maybe I do yoga, maybe I'm a cook, whatever it may be. And so there's no rule that you have to have a strict routine or practice. Somewhat strict routine or practice can be counterproductive, because one of the key attitudes of mindfulness is acceptance and non-judgment. And of course, when people start to write in their diary, I'm going to do 40 minutes of mindfulness meditation, and for some reason they don't, they can then use that as a judgment for themselves. So a nice way that I often encourage people to go to, the pathway I encourage people to take, is this: have a direction of travel. So you might say to yourself, right, my direction of travel is that I'm going to try to do more formal mindfulness practice in the next 2 weeks. And then it might be that that all comes in one day. It might be that it's spread out. It might be that it comes in unexpected moments. But at least then we're not judging ourselves. We are being more faithful to mindfulness, because we'll actually be responding to the moment as it actually comes, and not as we've pre-planned it. So that would be my advice, to take a gentler approach on ourselves.
That's really good to know, because personally I've put myself under pressure to relax and to be mindful at times, and it's quite a paradox, I suppose.
Yes.
And you can end up being stressed because you're not relaxing. So exactly. it's a very strange thing. So moving on to the third question here, and again, that was quite a nice segue into this question. And the question was around how long it takes mindfulness to work, whatever that means, and when can we begin to notice the impact of that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the second part of it's a lot easier to answer, and could be quite succinct on this one. The first part of that question really assumes that there's a destination of mindfulness, that somehow we're not mindful, we're going to practice, and then we will be mindful. And it's much better to think of mindfulness as a spectrum between being on autopilot, so not being mindful at all, to being sort of fully in the zone mindfulness. But in reality, we're all moving in between those states all day, every day. And so with mindfulness, what we're actually doing is we're building the capacity to be more mindful. I don't think there's an end point to that. I think that's just a growth journey. But when do we start to see benefits from it? That's a great question. So there's two ways to answer that. One is sort of quantitatively, and one is qualitatively. So quantitatively, we know that after 8 weeks of dedicated practice, which is at least 20 minutes every other day, so roughly speaking 10 minutes a day, but the studies that have been done on this, people sometimes don't do it daily, roughly 20 minutes every other day. After 8 weeks, we can see the actual changes in the neurology of the brain. And the part that we see first is in the outer cortex of the brain, and it's the parts that we try to work on with mindfulness, the part of the brain that commentates on what we're doing, that analyzes what we're doing, that judges ourselves in what we're doing. So that's the first part of the brain that starts to quieten down, and that little voice isn't so critical in the head. It's not so dominant, and that's a nice place to be. So 8 weeks is kind of the shortest sort of biological measure we have. Experientially, with clients and thousands of students over the years, usually people come back 2 or 3 weeks into their practice, and they've started to have experiences where they'll say, now normally I'm really stressed in that situation, but I just found myself a little bit calm. Or actually, it's usually that other people notice it in us before we do. They say, I was in a queue the other day, and my friend turned around and say, why are you so calm? Normally, you're manic in this situation. And so subtle differences come very soon. but then the structural, the biological, psychological changes, they're deeper. So we might not feel them massively to begin with, but we're building them up in time. So yeah, two ways of thinking about it, but usually it's not that long.
Thank you, Dean. I think that's really interesting, particularly for students who might be exploring mindfulness for the first time. I think perhaps certainly again, my own experience was the first time I came to a guided practice. There's this idea of I'll do it once and it will solve all these these things. I'm sure most people relate to that in some way. So I think that's a really interesting question, and thank you for that. So the next question, we keep going here. How can we best use mindfulness apps and make them work for us? So there's obviously a lot out there online, and mindfulness is quite, dare I say it, quite a buzzword. So there's probably a lot of apps, some that work better than others. How can they best work for students?
It's a great question. And I suppose that at the heart of the question is there a set pathway for all of us with mindfulness, or is it an individual journey? And if you go back into the Buddhism, they have a set pathway. If you go to the other end of the scale in secular clinical mindfulness, like mindfulness-based stress reduction program or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, they also have a very strict set pathway. But if you're not on either of those ends of the scale, so you're not going on the Buddhist route, or you're not doing this as a form of therapy, then actually in between that, it's very much about your personal journey. So with apps, with resources, there's lots on YouTube, there's lots of podcasts, there's lots of things out there. My advice is always try lots of different things and until you stumble upon something that actually works really well for you. It might not necessarily be what works for other people, but for you. So with apps, for example, it's very important to try. A lot of them, you get a free trial, so that's good. To try them out, you're looking for, do I like the approach to mindfulness that they do? Some will be more spiritual, some will be more clinical, some will just be in the middle. The guided practices that they do I like the length of them? Do I like the content? Even the accent of the person guiding? All these things are going to be different for each of us. And so my advice is apps are brilliant, but try to find one that is good for you, not necessarily the one that pops up first on the list. And that's always important because it's your journey and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So you use your judgment on them, use your discernment on them is what I'd say.
Fabulous. I think that's really sage advice, because there's so much out there that it can almost be off-putting. That you don't know what to choose. And of course, if you arrive at something that's not for you, I suppose you might think mindfulness isn't for me, when actually it of course is. And if you come across one of these approaches which is very strict, which is a very one size fits all approach, and that size doesn't fit you, again, you might be put off with it. So hopefully people are hearing that message, that there are more formal programs of mindfulness, but also it's about treading our own path, finding what's good for us. Fab. So our penultimate question here, which is perhaps a little bit of a deeper question and more relevant to the circumstances we all find ourselves in at the moment. And that was, is it worth doing mindfulness in precarious circumstances? And how can we use it in times of uncertainty? So very obvious question, I suppose, given what we're all going through. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, is it worth doing mindfulness in precarious circumstances? Absolutely. And, at the heart of mindfulness is the ability to bring the mind, body, and emotions just to the here and now and deal with whatever's in front of us. And let's say we're using it for performance in sport. We want to do the same thing, but that's more about performance and confidence and flow. If, though, we're in a moment that's challenging, we also want the same present-minded awareness. We want to be in that moment so that then we can see it as clearly as possible to try to navigate our way through it. And I think I've said this, Phil, in a lot of our sessions, but a great phrase here is that mindfulness is really good for helping us to navigate the difficulties, but it's also really helpful for us to lean into the positives too. And that balance is important. But there is a caveat on this one, which is, of course, if the question could be asked, is it worth training to do a marathon? Well, of course it is, yeah. But if I start my training the day before the marathon, I can't expect suddenly to perform extremely well and that training to be beneficial for me. So often we have students come to the mindfulness library sessions just prior to the exam period, which would have been now and previously in normal times. Yes, I can, you can use mindfulness to help yourself in that short sort of space. But to be effective, you want to sort of have started it way before those situations. And so you're building up the strength of mindfulness so that it can help you in the moments. Twisting that on its head then, when is a good time to start mindfulness? Sounds a bit corny, but right here, right now. Because actually it's about navigating life. We're already in it. So any time to pick it up is a good time. And that's how to explain that one.
So it's probably a good time again to signpost any viewers to the playlist we have below. That this is quite a quick fire session, obviously, but the guided practices are all below the stream and available on the Moodle Mindful Library as well. So our final question, so to speak, and this one's a bit more from left field, is what careers are there in mindfulness?
Yeah, interesting one. So as mindfulness, as a field of study, if you like, this kind of what we call modern mindfulness. Some people don't like the term, but as opposed to Buddhist traditional mindfulness, we're only talking from 1980 really, and it was a slow burner to begin with, as these things are. But now, of course, we have a massive explosion of interest and popularity and research. So up to now, what's usually happened is people who are professionals in other areas have also trained in mindfulness. So you get therapists who also train in mindfulness, doctors, you would get teachers or social workers. And so that's how it's been. Now we're starting to see that there are teacher training routes in mindfulness. There are CPD sessions you can do in mindfulness if you're in another career. Of course, like me, there will be increasing numbers of lecturers and researchers in mindfulness. So actually, it's a really, really good time to get involved in the field because it's just at the cusp now of when it's growing. It's got a body of evidence now, and the misconceptions are cleared up to a degree that it's just about to sort of become really, really interesting. So hopefully, if people are listening and they like what they've done and they think it could be part of their career, then it's a good time for them to get involved.
Brilliant.
Phil, I can just see another question, which is about somebody saying that they have anxiety and struggle to sit still. If we've got time, that's quite a nice one just to quickly answer. Because that shows us up something very important with mindfulness, and it's this. Mindfulness is a very gentle approach. We're trying to change the mind and then the body and emotional responses that follow. But in any, human beings, I'm a psychologist, we understand a lot about human beings. If I'm trying to change something, if my first step of that change is to go right to the opposite, to the end point I want, then the mind rebels. We've all tried it. We've all tried new diets and exercise routines and those kind of things. And so the best approach is actually to be very gentle and work with wherever you are right here, right now. So whoever sent in this question, they're saying, I have anxiety, I struggle to sit still. So don't try to sit still. Use your mindfulness with where your starting point is. You have anxiety, you struggle to sit still, maybe you're a bit fidgety. There are lots of nice mindful movement exercises where you can use that nervous energy and express it in the movement, and you won't be judging yourself because you're not sitting still. So sometimes people say, I tried that, Dean, but my mind was really busy. I must be doing it wrong, or it doesn't work for me. If we can just have a different mindset that says, my mind is busy. So that's where the start point is. Let's accept that. And I'm not going to try to clear my mind now. Let's just work on watching what the mind does. And let me see if some random thoughts pop up, and let's see if I can shift them out the way. So we're just very gentle, starting where we are, viewing it as a working with our mind, body, and emotions rather than against them. That would be my advice there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dean. And I suppose on behalf of Study Happy, we just want to say thank you for all the sessions you've delivered to students this term, because this is the last session we're having. I think for the first 2 terms were obviously in the library, and we didn't really expect that the final term would be virtual, but here we are. And we've had great attendances and great interest in mindfulness throughout the term. So I just wanted to say thank you for that, and thank you for all the support online as we've tried to transition everything over during this summer term.
Yeah, you are very welcome, and thank you to the library team as well, and for people who joined us live in the first 2 terms, but people have been joining us too with the online sessions. They've been sending in questions and comments. So thanks to everybody, and it's been nice that we've been able to continue with these sessions even in difficult times. And I think that in itself shows the mindful approach. We were aware that things needed to change, and so that was the reality of now, and hopefully we've been able to do that in a positive way. So big thanks to everybody involved.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dean, and thank you everybody for watching as well. Take care.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye everyone.